Welcome back, class. Let's go ahead and get started with a review of session number 9, where we talked about social influence, the role culture has in influencing our behavior. We also discussed conformity, where we adjust our behavior or thinking to fit in with a certain group standard. This included mimicry, as well as the chameleon effect. The chameleon effect is unintentionally mirroring the body position and mood of others around us, leading to contagions such as yawning. When one person yawns, another person may want to yawn. We also discussed Ash's classic conformity studies and then the roles of how it is that conformity will be increased or increasing conformity. Again, if you're not firmly committed to one set of beliefs or style of behavior, the group is medium-sized or unanimous, you admire or are attracted to that group, you're made to feel incompetent, insecure, or feel like you're being closely watched, or your culture encourages certain respects for norms. These will all lead to enhancing or increasing one's conformity pressures. So we pick now by talking about obedience, another type of social influence where we respond to commands. Stanley Milgram wanted to study the influence of direct commands on behavior. The question, under what social conditions are people more likely to obey commands? That's what he was asking. The experiment that he designed. An authority figure tells participants to administer shocks to a learner, actually a confederate of the researcher, someone who's working with him, when the learner gives wrong answers. Voltages increased. How high would people go? That was the question. Now, it should be noted that one of the reasons that Stanley Milgram was very interested in these questions, and the answers to these questions, was because of what had happened a couple of decades previous during World War II, when seemingly people from a civilized society began to systematically be involved in obeying orders to kill lots of innocent people. So he wanted to find out, were these people problematic? Were they psychotic or something of that nature? So the design of Milgram's obedience study. You have the learner, pictured here on the left, working with the researcher. You have the teacher, who's demonstrated on the graph on the right there, who will be asking the questions. And if the answer to the question was incorrect, which it often was, the teacher would flip a switch, providing an electric shock to the learner. At the bottom of this graph, you can see what the shocks look like. We have a slight shock from 15 to 60 volts, moderate, strong, very strong, intense, extreme intensity, danger severe, and then the more ominous XXX, 435 to 450 volts. So, what did we find out? So, in surveys, most people predict that in such a situation, they would stop administering shocks when the learner expressed pain. But in reality, even when the learner complained of a heart condition, most people complied with the experimenter's directions, such as, please continue, or you must continue, or the experiment requires that you continue. So even after claims of discomfort by the learner, all it would take for the teacher to continue administering shock would be for the researcher who was present to say, please continue, you must continue, or the experiment requires that you continue. The result was the following. How far did the compliance go? From this graph, you can see that a majority of the participants continued to obey to the very end. Approximately 65% of all the participants went all the way to XXX, 435 to 450 volts. Well, what factors increase obedience? So obvious what this research indicated to us is that people who were tested before they participated in the experiment to ensure they had no psychological issues that would suggest that they would act or behave in such a way. What factors increased obedience? Well, when orders were given by someone with legitimate authority, someone associated with a prestigious institution, or someone standing close by. When the learner slash victim is in another room, When other participants obey or no one disobeys, for example, that means there's no role model for defiance. And so other evidence of the power of obedience. The bad news is this. In war, some people at the beginning choose not to fight and kill, but after that, obedience escalates, even in killing innocent people. The good news, obedience can also strengthen heroism. Soldiers and others risk or even sacrifice themselves more so when under orders. So what this experiment sort of demonstrates to us is that we are somewhat hardwired to obey sort of authority figures. Lessons from the conformity and obedience studies. When under pressure to conform or obey, ordinary, principled people will say and do things they never would have believed they would do. To look at a person committing harmful acts and assume that the person is cruel or evil would make the fundamental attribution error. Remember, the FAE is about us overemphasizing dispositional or personal characteristics of the individual who's performing the behavior. Here suggests that there are going to be situational or social influences. So the real evil may be in the situation, not in the individual. Another aspect of social influence is group behavior. Besides conformity and obedience, there are other ways that our behavior changes in the presence of others or within a group. We'll talk about social facilitation, social loafing, de-individuation, group polarization, and groupthink. All of these have some ability to influence our behavior. Social facilitation. Individual performance is intensified when you are observed by others. Experts excel. People doing simple activities show more speed and endurance in front of an audience. But novices trying complex skills do worse. So in essence, if you are already well versed in a certain skill or behavior and other people are present, you will tend to perform better. If you're not so skilled, not so well versed in a particular behavior or skill, then the presence of others will tend to degrade your performance. So why would the presence of an audience facilitate better performance for everyone but newcomers? Being watched and simply being in crowded conditions increases one's autonomic arousal, along with increasing motivation for those who are confident and anxiety for those who are not confident. Then we have social loafing. Ever had a group project with a group grade and had someone in the group slack off? If so, you have experienced social loafing, the tendency of people in a group to show less effort when not held individually accountable. Why does social loafing happen? When your contribution isn't rewarded or punished, you might not care what people think. People may not feel their contributions are needed, that the group will be fine. People may feel free to cheat when they get an equal share of the rewards anyway. So note this, however. People in collectivist cultures don't slack off as much as groups when they could. Why? Well, obviously, a collectivist culture, they have a lot more feelings for the group, a lot more commitment to the groups than individualistic cultures may. Then we have de-individuation. This is a loss of self-awareness and self-restraint. Examples of some of these would be things like this: riots, hate group rallies such as the KKK, concerts, identity-concealed online bullying. It happens when people are in a group situations involving anonymity and arousal. Anonymity and arousal. So let's imagine if you're at some game or concert. People are happy. They're excited. That sort of suggests to the arousal. But then, when you're in a large group of people, you may have felt this before. You feel smaller in a way. You feel less yourself. That increases your sense of anonymity, that you are an anonymous member of the group. You can do something that maybe you would not normally do. So when these two things happen together, we have anonymity and arousal, then we have a situation that can occur that can cause all sorts of issues. You feel not like yourself. You become de-individualized. And what this basically leads to is that you may do and perform things that you normally would not do when you are more aware of yourself and you had more self-restraint. Then we have group polarization. This is when people of similar views form a group together. Discussion within the group makes their views more extreme. Thus, different groups become more different, more polarized in their views. People in these groups may have only encountered ideas reinforcing the views they already held. An example of this could be, for example, we see on the left part of the screen here, they can assess people's level of prejudice by giving them a survey, for example. So those people who scored high in prejudice and those people who scored low in prejudice, what happens is we get those individuals together in a group and they talk about things. Their discussions of with like-minded individuals will tend to strengthen their pre-existing ideas. So we get them back after they've had their discussions and measure their prejudice again. What we'll see is both groups, the ones who were high prejudice and those who were low prejudice, become more extreme in their already held beliefs. So the high prejudice group even scores higher in prejudice. The low prejudice group even scores lower in prejudice. So the notion here, and we can see this when it comes to things dealing with the internet, research does indicate, for example, that people go visit sites which already hold their ideas and their perspectives on things. So liberals go to liberal blogs, conservatives go to conservative blogs, and what this leads to is greater polarization. So their ideas may tend to become more extreme. Then we have the notion of groupthink. In pursuit of social harmony and avoidance of open disagreement, groups will make decisions without an open exchange of ideas. Groupthink, in a way, prevents thinking. It prevents a realistic assessment of options. Now, one of the classic examples, it's a little bit dated now, happens when it comes to the Challenger explosion of many years ago. They were well aware of some issues with the O-rings, which were on the big external fuel tanks of the space shuttle. And they knew that under certain conditions it would fail. And when weather gets really cold, certain items shrink, and that's the case here. The launches, however, were all being done in Florida, which is sort of known as a warm climate place. But it does sometimes get cold in Florida, which it did one night. And what happened after that, unfortunately, was the explosion of the shuttle. The previous evening shrunk the O-rings like washers such that fuel could escape when they launched the shuttle and exploded about 70-some seconds after launch. Groupthink just simply means that a group of individuals who are relatively close and familiar with one another, and if they have harmony and they like harmony, the notion is they don't always realistically and harshly review the decisions that they make, which can lead to catastrophic results, as we see in this particular instance. And then we have the social influence or the power of individuals. Despite all of these forces of social influence, individuals still have power. Some people resist obeying and conforming. Individuals can start social movements and social forces, not just get caught up in them. Groupthink can be prevented if individuals speak up when a group decision seems wrong. This is often done. Sometimes there will be an individual who will try to assert to the group that, hey, this sounds really bad if we make this particular decision and take this course of action. Well, normally the group will try to fight that, treating that person as a deviant and try to close them up. But depending on the power of the individual, they might be able to get through, speak up sufficiently enough to give someone else the courage to also state the same thing, thus preventing groupthink.